Hey folks, my name is Jeff Prueter. Welcome to English 9. I am so excited to talk to you a little bit about this class and why it is that I love teaching it. And I also want to use some time to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of our big goals for the year. Certainly an uncharacteristic year, but one that I think actually comes with a lot of opportunities. And so I'm excited to tell you a little bit about that. As far as me, this is my 11th year teaching. And for all 11 of those years, I've taught English 9. I've been at Southline for 9 years and then 2 years at a previous school. But again, English 9 in every one of those years. And I love it. I think that we have so many wonderful opportunities, to help students reach their goals and set them on a really great path here. If your student is someone who tends to really enjoy reading and writing, we have some amazing opportunities for them ahead with the text that we read, the writings that we are going to do, as well as so many other possibilities. If your student is kind of on the other end of that spectrum, either has never liked English or used to, but kind of fell out of love with reading or writing, we have a great chance to go ahead and kind of clear the slate a little bit and make sure that we get them on the track that we want them to be on. English 9 comes with a collection of really fantastic texts. We do 3 core texts, plus plenty of other articles and short stories and independent reading, which we're going to be talking quite a bit about. The core texts that we read are Of Mice and Men, To Kill a Mockingbird, and a new edition, Just Mercy, which came out just a few years ago. It's a nonfiction piece, national bestseller, fantastic text. And so we're really excited to add that into our curriculum. And I think it's going to be a great pairing with To Kill a Mockingbird, a text that is certainly considered a classic, but also could use a little bit of a modern influence. And so I think the pairing for that's going to be really wonderful. I want to talk a little bit about our class goals here as well. In its simplest form, we want to help your student become a better reader, a better writer, and a better thinker. All of that's going to lead to them being more engaged and informed citizens. And even though we might think about freshmen as not necessarily needing to quite be at that level of engagement, they are certainly paying attention to the world that they live in, and they are being inundated with so many different texts, whether that is on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it might be, let alone what they are seeing or reading as far as more traditional news sources. We need to help them navigate all of that. So our true goal is to help them become engaged and informed citizens and to start that process. So we do that through, again, helping them become better readers, better writers, and better critical thinkers. As far as becoming better readers, we have those core texts that I've already mentioned, but we also need to really establish a love for reading. And some of you are sitting there thinking, well, that's not my kid. We really struggle to get him or her to go ahead and crack open a book. And I want to kind of talk about that a little bit, as well as for students and parents who do feel like reading is something that is important to their kid, and it's something that they naturally engage in. So as far as becoming better readers, we are going to read those core texts, but we also put a huge emphasis on independent reading. In fact, I already had a conversation with your student this past week, 5 to 10 minutes, just me and your student. And we talked a little bit about their reading history. Where are they at in terms of themselves as a reader? Have they always loved reading? Did they used to love reading but have kind of fallen out of love with it a little bit? Or has reading always been a struggle and isn't a place where they feel comfortable? No matter where they're at, we're going to try and get some really interesting texts in their hands. Our classroom library has over 300 books in it, many of which have all been published in the last few years in our award-winning, best-selling young adult texts. And that's a great, great entry point for really any student and really anyone at all. I've really fallen in love with kind of the young adult fiction genres that we've started to see come out. And I think a lot of times we think young adult and we think that it's not serious literature. I think the last few years have really kind of taken that idea and proven that wrong. There's some really interesting, powerful texts going on, and we have a chance to get really interesting, powerful texts in your students' hands. What so many of your students said when I conferenced with them is, I'm not really a big reader, but if I find the right book, ... And that's been the big struggle. How do we find the right book? Our classroom library is going to be a wonderful starting point for that. Your student already had a chance to explore that classroom library, digitally, of course, and you still have access to that. So after watching this video, if you're looking for kind of that starting point of a conversation about how English is going, consider asking what your student jotted down in their notebook as far as books they thought they would be interested in reading this year. And you can, again, go and click through that actual digital library that we created. That way, you can see the covers and read the synopsis of each book that your student found to be interesting and intriguing. They can go ahead and check those out, certainly from me. They could certainly order their own books, although that is not an expectation by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes people just kind of like to have their own book and not have to give it back. But we are truly going to put a lot of emphasis on reading this year. It's going to be a year in which we may be in person at some times. We're going to be online certainly at some times. There might be times where we come back and then have to go back out. We just don't know. But one constant we're going to have is have great literature in front of us. Let's also talk about why that's really important, especially for people who find that they're struggling readers. Check this out. This came out from Scholastic a few years ago, and I think it's really interesting to think about what 20 minutes a day can do. Students who read for 20 minutes a day, and that means they are the active reader, not sitting passively listening to me read, although read alouds, I think, have their place and are wonderfully powerful. But that idea of them being completely focused and them doing 100% of the work, students who read 20 minutes a day, 1.8 million words a year. That's how many they're exposed to. That's a powerful, powerful collection of words. And students who tend to do that year after year after year end up on average in the 90th percentile. It's amazing, 20 minutes. Students who read 5 minutes a day, that's an incredible drop off, 282,000 words a year. Students who do that year after year after year usually end up in the 50th percentile. And students who read for about a minute a day, only 8,000 words a year. Now, of course, we have to keep in mind standardized tests are flawed and they are not perfect in any stretch of the imagination. But I do think that's incredibly, incredibly telling. What can we do with 20 minutes of sustained reading in which we're the ones engaging? Now, for some of our students, 20 minutes sounds like a fantastic use of time. For others, that 20 minutes seems incredibly, incredibly daunting. For those students, we're going to have a slow buildup. But that's what we're going to try and get to, ideally by the end of the semester, is that 20 minutes a day doesn't feel that daunting. But we may need to start with 5 minutes and then move to 7 and then to 10 and then to 12 and so on and so forth. But we can see the value in that. And the true way that we are going to get students to read for 20 minutes a day is not through reading logs or anything like that. It's through getting really interesting, powerful text in their hands. And that is my job, right? And they are going to help me in that process. As I said, I conferenced with every single one of your students this week, with the exception of a few who will be coming back to next week. And that idea of conferencing is going to be so incredibly powerful. That's where we work through our reading struggles, and we can be really honest with one another about what books are working, what books are not, and why. That way, we can hopefully go ahead and start to work toward becoming people who truly enjoy reading. And that doesn't mean we have to replace all of our other hobbies. But a lot of students tend to think about reading as an either or, right? Like, I'm either a reader or I like sports. I'm either a reader or I prefer to be outside. Those don't have to be either ors, right? We can find a way to balance. And that's going to be one of our major goals with our reading. Also, we talked about becoming better writers. Now, why else do we want to do a lot of reading? Because good readers are good writers, and good writers tend to be good readers. That's a cyclical process. Writers read a lot, and they steal things from other writers that are really good. We'll talk about that good writers are actually good thieves, and that the more you read, the more ideas you get to make your own writing better. But even independent from reading, writing is such a personal thing. We're going to do a lot of conferencing this year. We already talked about that briefly with our reading. We're going to do that a lot with our writing as well. One of the wonderful things about block scheduling, which we're moving to this year, is it gives us time to come together as a class, work together, and then do some independent work. And while we're doing independent work, that's a chance for me to sit down with individual students and work through their reading, as we discussed, but also their writing. And I think that's where we tend to see the most growth, is when we can work through those kinks that we so often run into in our writing, where we just don't know where to go, or we feel like we have an idea, but it only feels important to us. How do we make that matter to a larger audience? That's the beauty of conferencing. If we're sitting there and we've got 33 students in a classroom and me up front, the writing starts to feel impersonal. Conferencing allows us to make that personal. The conferencing for reading and writing helps us also with our critical thinking skills, being able to navigate challenging situations and work through things that we read that we're kind of struggling with and grappling with. We've talked a lot already in this early school year about how to think critically and really trying to dive beneath the surface of what it is that we're reading. We've used the iceberg analogy that when we read a story, that the plot, the characters, all those things are right there on the surface for us to go ahead and see. But the true idea of the story tends to be beneath the surface. And we have to be willing to dive underneath and submerge ourselves a little bit to figure out what's really going on there at the core, at the base. And your students have already started to do a fantastic job. We've been working independently, in small groups, and in large groups in that pursuit of becoming better readers, better writers, and better thinkers, and to dive beneath the surface. And if we can start to build those important skills, we will become more engaged, more informed, and be able to navigate all of the challenges that we have. Final thing, if you're at this point in the video, the reason you're here is because you want to be able to help your student find success. I'm going to kind of slide myself up. I think these are kind of a big five to think about. One, if you are someone who reads, share a little bit of what you've been reading. I think talking about reading actually is really helpful, and seeing you read is going to help your student. If you're not a big reader, could that be almost a little personal goal? You and your students to say, okay, listen, high school, let's go ahead and set a little bit of a goal at home, even if it's just to start with 5 or 10 minutes, I think would be a fantastic goal. Building off that is the discuss tab. Talk with your student about what they are reading. You don't even have to have read that piece. When we get into Of Mice and Men here in about a month, it's okay if you have not read that since high school or if you never read it at all. Ask about what your student thinks. What questions does your student have? What's making sense? What's confusing? Asking those questions and then asking why as a follow-up is going to give you a lot of insight into how well is my student understanding this text. Even if you don't know the details, you'll know just based on their comfort level whether or not you need to say, cool, sounds great. I'm glad that you're navigating this text well. Or you can say, it sounds like maybe you want to reach out to Mr. Prueter, do some conferencing, and make sure we get back on the right track. I think part of that too is with the respond and the listen tab. Those tend to be a little bit more for writing, but I think certainly this is all kind of like a cyclical thing that kind of works together. When you have a chance and your student is working through some writing, ask to hear it. One, have them read it out loud. And when your writer reads their work out loud, chances are they're actually going to hear some inconsistencies, or if you read it to them, they're going to hear some inconsistencies. They'll be able to make their own revisions. You just have to be the audience. Again, we don't need you to be an expert. We need you to be present. We need you to ask some questions. And it's funny, they'll end up actually doing most of that work. Respond is kind of in that same vein. If they are willing to get some more concrete feedback, start by reading the piece and saying, okay, here's what I took away from that. That summary is going to be so incredibly powerful because they're going to know whether their intent came across or not. If you're able to say, this is what I think you were kind of chasing after, and they say, yeah, that's what I wanted, their intent is clear. If you give a quick summary and they say, well, yeah, but, and then they need to fill in some gaps, chances are they need to fill in some gaps in their writing. Again, you as the audience is the key. And last but not least, kind of a nice one to wrap it up is just that read. Again, don't need to be an expert. You just need to have that conversation. And asking them to summarize or you summarizing is really that first step, that can really push them forward. So these are kind of the big picture things that I really want us to focus on as far as how you can help your student be successful. And I think that's going to pair really well with some of our big goals that we have here, as far as becoming better readers, better writers, better critical thinkers, all in that pursuit of becoming more engaged and informed. That's our ultimate goal here. All right, folks. So plenty more information to get to as far as kind of the nitty gritty of how grades are weighted. But at the end of the day, the reason you watch this video is because you want your student to be successful. And all of that will translate to the grade book if we do these other things really well. Folks, thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. I look forward to hearing back from you with any questions, comments, concerns, certainly related to this, but also throughout the year. And this is going to be a year in which we definitely need a partnership. And I look forward to working together to hopefully give your student the best year that we can give them. And that is our ultimate goal there. So thank you once again so much for your time. My email's here on the page, prueterj@slcs.us. And we look forward to a great year together with your student. Thank you so much.